Good evening, and thank you for joining tonight's webinar. My name is Jen Frobish, and I serve as FRAXA's Advancement Director, and I'll be moderating tonight's webinar. As we get started, I'd like to introduce you to our guest facilitator, Sarah Hamilton. Sarah is a FRAXA ambassador and an amazing mother to a young man with Fragile X. She has been very active in the Fragile X community as an advocate and officer of the Fragile X Resource Center of Missouri. She and her family also have experience with the Zynerba study that we're here to learn about. Welcome, Sarah, and thank you for serving as our facilitator tonight. I also want to introduce our two special guests from Zynerba Pharmaceuticals. Stephen O'Quinn is joining us, and he serves as a consultant for the medical program of Zynerba. And Dr. Joseph M. Palumbo is the Chief Medical Officer at Zynerba Pharmaceuticals. He completed his Bachelor of Arts at the University of Pennsylvania and his Doctor of Medicine at the George Washington University School of Medicine. He was a Biological Sciences Training Program Fellow of the National Institutes of Health and Chief Resident for the Abraham Ribicoff Clinical Neuroscience Research Unit at Yale University. His experience is quite extensive. Dr. Palumbo is board certified in psychiatry and has an incredible professional history that is now guiding Zynerba. Thank you, Stephen and Dr. Palumbo, for joining us. The floor is yours.
Absolutely more than honored to be here. I speak for Stephen and everyone at Zynerba. We're touched and really delighted to have this invitation to talk a little bit about our research and our upcoming study. So our upcoming study is called RECONNECT, and it follows our initial or our earlier study that was called CONNECT. And let's talk a little bit about the RECONNECT study, please. So what is RECONNECT? RECONNECT is a clinical study. It is randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, multiple center, and is studying the efficacy and safety of our molecule, ZYN002. Sometimes we refer to it as Zygel. It is a transdermal gel to be studied in Fragile X. In children and adolescents. So what does that really mean? Randomized means we don't know who's actually getting the drug. Half of the people do, and half of the people get placebo, which looks just like the drug but doesn't have the active component. So randomized means it's like a roll of the dice. Double blind means that nobody knows. I don't know. No one knows who actually gets the drug. It's determined by a computer. Placebo-controlled means that some people are getting a gel that doesn't have the drug in it, at least in the beginning part of the study, because people who finish the study, everyone gets the opportunity to get the drug. Multiple center. We're planning for at least 25 centers in the United States, Europe, the UK, and Australia. And transdermal gel means it is a clear gel that we rub onto the skin that looks and feels and smells like any of the gels we use to keep our hands clean. And children and adolescents, that means children as young as 3 and as old as 17. The other thing I have to underline that's super important is this is still an experimental treatment. We've done a lot of research. We've had, altogether 900 or 1,000 people who've been in all of our studies, not just the ones in Fragile X. But this is an experimental drug. It's not approved by the U.S. government or by any other regulatory agency. So part of what we're doing here is we're going through those very important regulatory and scientific steps to see if this is a molecule that can become a medicine. So again, what is this? So if you look on the left-hand part of this slide, what you can see is what is a cross-section of the skin. So epidermis, imagine that is the top part, the outside of your skin, and the red part is the circulation underneath and the capillaries. And what makes ZYN002 different from, say, the CBD oil that you can, potentially buy at the corner market, is that the CBD here is very, 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 very pure, and that it's manufactured and combined with an enhancer that helps it get across the skin. CBD itself really doesn't want to cross the skin. So what we do in the preparation at Zynerba is to allow the drug to get across the skin and then into the circulation. So first of all, right, so this is transdermal. It means this is not a pill. This is not something that the child has to take orally or otherwise. By going in through the skin, we give the liver a little bit of a break. So when we talk about avoiding first pass metabolism, what we're saying is instead of taking the pill by mouth and in the stomach, and then it has to be metabolized by the gut and the liver, we give the liver a little bit of a break, and the drug gets into the bloodstream directly through the skin. Um, and that's good because we know some kids, have tummy troubles when they take a medication, particularly when it's new. And we've seen very, very few examples of kids having upset stomach during the course of the development. The next box says it's pharmaceutically manufactured. And what that means is we've chosen as a company not to really be farmers, right? So that's not part of what we do. We're taking very, very pure medicine, making it extremely pure so we know its consistency. Because we're not farming it, there's no potential for heavy metals or things, anything from the environment. And of course, we're working to what's called GMP, which is good manufacturing processes that are regulated by the US government, by the FDA. The other important thing here is that cannabidiol is the part of cannabis that is not intoxicating. It doesn't have a signal. And THC, which is the intoxicating part, right? That's not found in this medicine, what we hope to be a medicine. So we don't detect it in the urine or the blood, what we're talking about is plasma. So overall, what we've done here is we've created this gel that you rub on the skin. Uh, and what you rub on is about a half a teaspoonful of gel onto the shoulders, onto each shoulder, depending on the child's weight. We think this is pretty pure and pretty stable. So, okay, this is an eye chart. I apologize, but there may be a few science geeks out there like me. So if you're out there, I love you. So please listen to me. Why would we ever study this in such an important and serious condition as Fragile X? And the answer is about the endocannabinoid system. So when I first came to this company 2.5 or more years ago, I heard it was cannabidiol. And I said, well, okay, that's interesting. And then I started to study. What does cannabidiol do and what does it interact with? So it interacts with something that's in our own bodies called the endocannabinoid system. And the endocannabinoid system actually is really present in the cortex of the brain and the part of the brain that involves thinking, mood, and emotion. It's actually one of the most prevalent systems in the brain, and we keep learning more and more about it. But what we've learned is that, especially in the absence of certain proteins, FMRP, the endocannabinoid system itself doesn't function particularly well, right? So when the FMR1 gene is not functioning well, and there's an absence of FMRP, this also affects the endocannabinoid system. So it's like dominoes. So what we think is when we can potentially replace the functioning or improve the functioning of the endocannabinoid system, maybe we can restore some function. So we know, for instance, when there are alterations, changes in the endocannabinoid system, it changes your thinking, changes your behavior, it makes you more likely to be irritable, more anxious. And so we take in cannabidiol, which is Zyn002. It's the same thing, right? Except that it's cannabidiol that goes through the skin. And we've tried to target that specifically to ask the question, if we give this medication to improve the functioning of the ECS, the endocannabinoid system, that is not functioning so well in the absence of FMRP, can we improve behavior? So we think it will help minimize some of the changes seen in Fragile X. Again, we're still evaluating this. This is transdermally delivered. We're trying to treat behaviors. We're not trying to treat physical symptoms. We are trying to treat behaviors. So we did a study. Some of you know it well. It was called Connect FX. And that study certainly suggested that there could be, and I'm using specific words, right? Could be, right? Because we're still studying the drug. There could be a beneficial effect on behaviors in children who received the drug, particularly those kids who have what's called significant methylation of the FMR1 gene. And we also found that the drug was well tolerated. So what does that actually mean, this methylation? So when you think of the FMR1 gene, the part that doesn't really function the way we want it to in Fragile X is this promoter region. And if that promoter region, for some reason, gets too long, and technically we call that triplet repeats, if it gets too long, it makes it very, very hard for that gene to make the protein that it needs to make. But if you give this thing a second hit, you take that area that's kind of too long, and then you methylate it. You take these carbon and 3 hydrogen groups and you sit them there. It's almost like rust. If you think of oxygenation, when something gets oxidized and it rusts something and it blocks its proper function, methylation is another way that biological systems can get impaired. So that happens naturally, but when it happens, it really does shut the gene down. So what we're trying to learn in this next study that we're asking you to think about is, can we confirm or not confirm what we believe we learned in Connect FX? A lot of stuff. Okay, so here's what we saw, right? So in Connect FX, we did a couple of interesting things. We asked in a very prospective way, we asked in this study, can we learn how much change is clinically important? So we're not saying let me say it a different way. In many clinical studies, the endpoint, whatever it is, right? Say you're trying to see how long something lasts, right? Or how bad something gets. You measure it perhaps in points or in inches or in miles. And if you're 1 inch longer, 1 inch better, and you get that to statistical significance, statistically you win. You can declare victory. But we didn't want to do that. We wanted to say, well, if we're better, how can we be clinically meaningfully better? So we set up a number of analyses to say, we're not interested just in whether or not we change by X. We want to know, how much do we have to change that it makes a difference in someone's life, in a family's life. So we did that for social avoidance using the ABC scale, the Aberrant Behavior Checklist. That's been modified for Fragile X. Therefore, it looks more sort of anxiety, social avoidance that makes Fragile X what it is. We looked at irritability, which are some of the challenging behaviors. And we looked at social unresponsiveness, this sort of almost like depressed symptoms, right? So you can think of social avoidance as I'm hiding, because probably I'm upset or anxious. Irritability, I'm not being very nice right now because I don't feel very good, right? I'm just not comfortable, and I might be unhappy, and I might show you that. And socially unresponsive is I'm kind of just not interacting with you. So we determined that 3 points of change in social avoidance was important. We determined that 9 points of change in irritability was important, and social responsiveness, unresponsiveness, being lethargic, tired, the change was 5 points. So we calculated out the p-values and the odds ratios, which essentially says how much more likely, right? How many times more likely. Now, it's important to understand we're looking here now in kids who have a lot of methylation, right? So these are the kids who have 90% methylation of that promoter region of the gene that I was just talking about. So now this is an easily biologically defined population because there are blood tests that easily do this now. And frankly, when we started our last study, all of these tests weren't easily available. They are now easily available, and it allows us to do some of these analyses. But let's kind of look at what we saw in this highly methylated group. And again, right, this was not the primary analysis. This is looking specifically, following up on a hunch that maybe methylation was important. So for social avoidance, how many kids, what percentage of the kids met that threshold for at least 3 points? Well, 58%, almost 60% of the kids on drug versus about 40% on placebo, 60-40, met that met that plateau, met that requirement, that step. Was this clinically important? And that's meaningful to us, that a p-value of 0.03 and an odds ratio of a little bit better than 2. So that's cool. How about irritability, right? So this is I'm so uncomfortable. I'm doing things you're probably not happy with. And there that was 40 to 23, again, with a nice p-value. And remember, these are p-values that are sort of done in, sort of in an experimental way, right? These are exploratory. So we're calling them p-values, but they are certainly exploratory. And then socially unresponsive, lethargic, almost to trend level. We like to get to this p equals 0.05 or less. But we're showing this because the odds ratio is still 1.5, so 1.5 times more likely that you're going to show a change of, say, 5 points in social and responsive behavior. So we look at this and, we're encouraged with the data, but it's not what we understand finally. We still have to repeat this. Okay, so looking back again at the study Connect FX, which some of you participated in, and if you did, thank you very much. So the good news is the drug applied to the skin was very, very well tolerated. So there were no serious or severe adverse events reported during the trial. So this meant that no one was hospitalized. But what did kids get if they did have side effects? 6.4% versus placebo is some pain, some redness, some dryness at the application site. So this means that the gel we're using is an alcohol-based gel, so it's like the things we use as hand cleaners, right? It smells that way, feels that way. When you rub it on the skin, your skin can get a little bit dry. So this is what we saw. We asked families, did this continue over time? And for 98% of people, this went away. The other thing that really helped during the study was we gave people skin lotions like Cetaphil, and that helped with the dryness. But there are a few more kids who had a little bit more application site pain. Now, here's other really good news. We know that kids are taking often a lot of medicine, and we have to follow blood tests very carefully: chemistry, hematology. Chemistry meaning electrolytes and things of that nature. How the liver works. Hematology is white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets. And we saw that in the placebo groups and the treatment groups, there were really no clinically relevant abnormalities in either group. So that makes us feel really good that at least in this trial and in the studies we've done before, there are no laboratory anomalies we've seen so far. So that's good. And then we're aware that one of the questions about cannabidiols, particularly when they get the high doses, is does it affect your liver? Right. So we know that there have been some publications. We are very happy, right? Knock on wood, cross fingers, all those wonderful things. Thank our Lord that we didn't see liver function changes when we give the drug through the skin. So again, all this has to be continued. We have to keep looking at this during the clinical studies. But to this point, safety, efficacy, they are what I've described. And of course, as a physician, is first do no harm. We're not doing harm, at least not in the overall group of people, right? So that's where we are with safety. So what is now RECONNECT? We're going to this next stage. So this is the next study, right? So first was CONNECT. This is RECONNECT. This is an 18-week pivotal trial. The other was a little shorter. We think that this, in looking at our data, children continue to improve over time. So this is an 18-week study evaluating efficacy, which is does the drug work, and safety, which is does it hurt you, in children and adolescents 3 through 17 years who meet the diagnosis of Fragile X. That is, they have the full mutation of FMR1. And this is being conducted because we've talked to FDA, and FDA has said, we really need you to confirm what you saw in your first study. Can you do it again? And that's very reasonable to ask us, can you do it again and replicate what you saw the first time? Patients will be enrolled regardless of the degree of methylation of FMR1. So even though we think we saw some benefit in these kids who had 90% or greater methylation, we have to double check that. We don't want to leave anyone out if they're going to respond. So while we think our hypothesis continues to be that methylation is really important, it's absolutely necessary to double check that. Now, in reality, of kids who come to care, we believe that about 80% of children who come to medical care have very high levels of methylation. So we don't think that we're leaving out very many people, even if we weren't to have this requirement for enrollment regardless of methylation. But we think it's really important to make sure that we check it again and everybody has an opportunity. The other thing we're happy about, and we're able to afford to do this as a tiny company, that patients who participate in RECONNECT may have the opportunity to receive open label ZYN002 in an extension study, which means, and I say may, because you have to meet inclusion criteria, right? You have to be accepted for participation in a study. But if you finish that study, all other things being equal, if you'd like to continue getting the real drug, because you don't know if you're receiving placebo or active drug in the first part of the study. So you have study part A, which is double blind, study part B, which everyone gets the drug. Everyone who gets through part A gets into part B, they can get the drug. So everyone who gets into the study will have the opportunity to receive the study drug. And we have some kids from our earlier studies who've been on the drug for up to 4 years now. And what does this study look like? So let's look at the box below. It is a flow diagram. We're planning on bringing in 204 approximately, if it's 205 or 210, it's 204 patients with Fragile X, 3 through 17 years old. Randomized means one-to-one means it's a roll of the dice. The computer determines whether you're assigned to drug or placebo for the first part of the study for part A. Depending on how much you weigh, you'll get 250 milligrams, 500 milligrams, or 750 milligrams per day. And what that means is you get a little bit more, a little less gel to rub into your shoulders, right? And placebo means you're getting gel that just doesn't have the CBD in it. And then when you finish that study, if everything goes well, right, you move on to the open extension. And as I said, we've had some kids who are in that study for up to 4 years now. Okay, so how do you get into this study? Well, age is important, right? We're looking at younger people. So ages 3 to less than 18, okay? We're asking for biological confirmation of Fragile X. So that's FMR1 full mutation of greater than 200 CGG triplet repeats. And then we're trying to be actually quite liberal, right? So if you have a history of a seizure disorder, that's okay. Just please stay on a stable regimen, right? For the 4 weeks preceding screening. And then we kind of ask you to be seizure free, right? If you've not been receiving anti-epileptic drugs. Because we know a certain percentage of the kids, maybe 10% of the kids are going to have seizure disorders. And we're saying that's okay, right? Just stay on a stable medicine. And we also know that kids are going to take a lot of different medications. We call them psychotropic medications, but they're given for specific symptoms, right? So, if the child is taking, aripiprazole or sertraline, Zoloft, or something for anxiety, or even for ADHD or something for sleep, we're going to understand that, right? We're simply saying, if you're on these, just keep them stable, right? Keep them stable before you come into the study. You can't change them during the study, because if you change them during the study, then we don't know what's helping, the change of the medicine or our drug. So that's the compromise. So if you're on these drugs and you come into the study, you just can't change the dose during the study, okay? And when we talk about psychotropic medications, what are we talking about? Drugs like risperidone, antipsychotics, antidepressants, drugs like sertraline, which we might use for anxiety, anxiolytics, things to reduce anxiety, and things like stimulants, et cetera. And some certain medications for sleep that we're not including melatonin. We believe melatonin is pretty benign. And then we also understand that you're going to do your best to stay well and get well, right? So there are non-pharmacological treatments. There are dietary interventions. We support all of this, right? We're simply saying, keep them stable, right? Because the experiment we're doing is, does a change by adding Zygel, adding ZYN002 on top of stable standard of care, does that addition help or does it hurt? So if we're changing the other things, then we really can't answer the question, right? So those are sort of the important parts. Okay, here's what this looks like, right? So there are 8 visits. over 18 weeks, and half of them are virtual. And everything involves iPads. And everything involves the parents and the caregivers telling us, is my child better? Right? So this is really voice of the patient, voice of the family. So the first visit is week, what we call -3, right? So this is sort of a screening, and this requires someone to come in office, or you have to go to the doctor's office. That's informed consent. That's hearing some of the things that I'm talking about. It's making the decision between you, your family, your doctor. Is this a study for me? And if it is, do I understand that I can't change my medicines, for instance? Is that acceptable to me? So that's informed consent. We're going to take medical history to make sure that we understand how the child has been doing medically. We're going to do a physical exam to make sure that nothing changes over time. We are required to do laboratory testing, which means taking a small sample of blood. We know that that's problematic. We don't want to do it, but we have to do this because it's an FDA requirement. We try to keep that sample minimum, and we try to keep the number of times that's required down to only 2 times in the study, unless you're on a drug that FDA wants us to double check on in the middle of the study, and then you might get another blood test. But we'll send someone to your house to do it. We have to do an EKG or an ECG, and then we have to do sort of these questions, assessments. So we're trying to keep these number of assessments to the smallest number of assessments, right? So in many clinical studies, people are going to ask, can you get this test? Can you get that test? Can you sit here for 3 or 4 hours? We're not asking for that. We know you're in good care. So tell us what the doctor's been saying. Bring that information with you, right? Apply that. And we're simply going to see, are the behaviors changing over time? Okay, so that's the first visit. The second visit is day 1. This is in office. So we're now confirming what we saw in the first visit, right? Did anything change? Are you still okay? Are you still ready to go forward? And if you are, here's where we begin the blinded study medication. You leave this visit and you get some gel. And then we start asking you every day, how's your skin doing? Right? And again, the idea here is we're applying that gel twice a day to the shoulders, morning and evening. And we're asking you every day, what's your skin looking like? Because we know we've got alcohol in there. We're worried to make sure that children, young children especially, when they have some alcohol in their skin, doesn't make their skin dry. Does it hurt? Okay. Visit 3 is, again, checking in. How are you doing? Are you still okay to continue? And then we move remote, right? Then it's you and your iPad and your internet staying home, doing their visits remotely, no travel, right? And we think that's really important. And frankly, this wasn't some brilliant idea we had. We simply learned in COVID that we actually didn't have to do all the things we thought were necessary. That people were just fine telling us how they were doing. And we looked at the data and we said, gosh, it doesn't matter if you're in the office or at home talking to us on Skype or whatever. Quality of the data is just as good. And frankly, the families are a heck of a lot happier not having to get on an airplane or a car or a train or anything else and traveling. Look, we know that we had some kids, if they came to the office, they were sitting in a minivan and the doctor was going out to see them, right? So we really think that doing this virtually is cool and appropriate. So week 4, week 6, week 10, week 14, we're just doing our assessments. At week 10, which is our visit 6, some kids are going to require laboratories. FDA said if you're on risperidone or an antipsychotic or you're taking a medication for seizures, we had to get a little bit of blood work, but we're not coming into the office. We're sending someone out to do that. Or if you want, I think you can go to a local lab. But we're trying to make this as painless as possible. Week 14 is also virtual. And then finally, when the study's finished, because the study's done, another physical exam, labs to make sure that everybody's safe, another EKG. We don't think there's any reason why we need to do the EKG other than it is for form. And then we check at the end, are you better or worse? Did you get better on drug, if you were on drug, or on placebo, right? And that's the study, okay? That's the study. If you want more information about the study, there's a couple of places you can go. You can go to this website, fragilexhelp.com. There's also a telephone number. You can go to clinicaltrials.gov, and you can look for the study using that code. But I think the most important thing is talk to your doctors, right? If this sounds like it's interesting, and make a determination. Does this seem like it's worthwhile? Right. So let me stop there. You guys have been, I'm touched, right? I know we're going to have questions. I hope you're going to have questions, but look, I don't often get to talk to families and patients anymore. Usually, I've been sitting in a laboratory or someplace else for years and years, and this is like a thrill. So I hope you'll ask me questions. Otherwise, I'm going to feel very bad.
All right. Well, we definitely had some questions that came
Cool.
in before, and then we've
Thank you,
got some people
Sarah.
I know that have some things that may have popped up while you were speaking. However,
Super.
you did an amazing job at describing everything, and a lot of the questions we had beforehand you already addressed. So, um, one thing I wanted to ask was a lot of our kids have some pretty severe sensory issues. So they
Yes.
might be
Yeah.
aversive to touch or
Yep.
smell. So, just in the application,
Yep.
especially like with the odor, like, is there any odor or anything that we might need to worry about or that might be difficult
Yeah.
for our kids to manage?
That's really important because we're very much aware of this of the sensory issues. If a child has been used to any of the hand gels that are out there, it looks and smells just like it. So in our previous study, we had one child, I guess we had 212 children. We had one child that said, look, the smell of alcohol is too much for me, but everyone else stayed in. Uh, we had a couple of kids who thought the gel was too cold because some of the families actually were keeping it in the refrigerator. We found that for those kids, taking the packet and going like this and warming it up seemed to be helpful. And that was our experience with the first 212 kids. What we see going forward, we'll just have to hear. We'll have to learn one more time to confirm that. But that was our experience that first time. And yeah, we did have one child. He said, "Smell of alcohol is strong for me."
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Um, so we did, my son Jackson did participate in the initial study. So we have some experience with that. I will say I love that things are hybrid and virtual now because that was
Yes.
part of the big challenge for our family.
You
And I know
know.
many Fragile X families is traveling any
Yes.
distance. So that's great. So can you describe the actual application process? Like how, like if you can let people know what, yeah,
Okay.
like of the
So
gel
you know
itself.
what? I'm going to have you do that after I do it, and you tell me how accurate I am.
Okay,
Okay.
sure.
So having worked with kids and having had my own kids, one of the things I've always liked is this concept of sort of therapeutic touch, which is when someone's upset, you touch their shoulders. Sometimes you rub them, right? It can be very loving, right? Under the right circumstances, right? That I have to underline that. Um, the gel comes in these little tiny packets that frankly look like somebody stole them from McDonald's, right? They are. They're these little foil packets in which there is a dose of medicine. Depending on your size and weight, you take more than one or however many. We squeeze them open. Because it's still an experimental drug, we ask the parents to wear these little blue gloves. And then you rub it onto the skin. And within 20 or 30 seconds, you rub it into the skin until the skin is dry and just into the shoulders right there. Um, I like it better than giving kids oral medicine, right? But it does mean that someone's shoulders are naked. And for some of the older kids, particularly the girls, there's a little bit of sensitivity there. Some of the kids learn how to put the gel on themselves, although we do really ask for the parents to supervise. Uh, and overall, it seems to be pretty well tolerated. And we found that certainly some parents like it to be their job, right? So I'm the gel person, right? You can be the person who helps to do the skin checks, but I'm the gel person. Um, but overall, we haven't, at least on our side, heard that it was overly miserable, right? We heard in the beginning, gosh, are you sure this doesn't have any THC in it? And gosh, if they find THC in it, am I going to lose my job? I'm a cop. I think those days are over for us right now. Uh, but Sarah, tell me, did I get it right?
Yeah, definitely. I think for us, it helped. I know our kids definitely like routine, so we made almost a little game out of it, and we sang a song while we were applying it. So that's something that I use, a technique I use a lot. So if we're doing something that's maybe less preferred, like brushing teeth or
Yeah.
doing something new that's different, we just kind of incorporated like singing a song and, or counting, making sure that we got the whole thing, got it all in. So yeah, I mean it
Now,
did.
now I'm really suspicious when my wife is singing to me. I know something bad.
Oh, well, okay. Thank you for answering that.
Okay.
So you mentioned the documentation, and
Yes.
I remember specifically, keeping the logs and everything. I'm wondering, has any of that moved to
It's
electronic
it's
documentation, or is it
all
all still
moved.
manual?
No, 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 no. We got smart, right? We moved all of that onto genuine, real iPads, right?
Great.
So it's
Okay.
all electronic. I mean, if someone really, really wants to do pencil and paper, we'll find a way to accommodate that person, although we would probably frown a little bit. But yeah, it's all electronic now. We've
Okay.
really tried to streamline that.
That's great. That
Steven did
I
that.
think.
That's one of the things Steven did. So I don't know if you can still see his smiling face or in the corner of the screen. He's responsible for the making that much more streamlined.
Yeah. So another question that came in would be, would we need to notify school or anybody else that we're participating in this study? Would they need to be expected to kind of keep an eye on things or do any reporting or assessing?
And that's a great question because I've run a lot of studies like this where you really want the parents, rather the school teachers engaged. We're not requiring it, so I think that's a. And again, in certain studies that I've run, we want the specific input of teachers. We give a scale, right, for them to fill out. We're not specifically asking for that. On the other hand, these are your children. You might want to know how your kids are doing at school. There's the possibility this is an experimental drug that your child will have a rash, right? But that's completely up to you. We're not requiring it. But if you want to share that with your school and the teacher and the school nurse, please, you use your very best judgment, and you may hear things about improvement or lack of improvement that you would not necessarily have access to just in the hours you have at home with your child. So completely up to you. As a physician who's treated children, I kind of encourage it, but that's not a requirement.
Sure. So since a lot of it is being done virtually,
Yeah.
and reporting virtually, are you guys providing iPads for the
Oh
families that
yes.
are okay?
Every child will get an iPad. Well, every parent. We're not giving the children iPads. Because we know what will really happen. So if but every child in this study will have an iPad to do his or her ratings.
Great. Um, Also, with the remote blood work, you said you could
Mhm.
possibly send somebody to the home.
Yes. Yeah.
Are those people that are kind of trained or have worked with kids with special needs or specifically kids with Fragile X before?
So whether or not they work with Fragile X, I can't quite promise. We're still working out some of the very last details. But our request and requirement is we were looking for nurses who've worked with kids who've had behavioral challenges. That's what we're asking for, right? We will try to get you that specific information as quickly as we can. I know Kristen Kaplan, who's on this call, is working on that, as well as Nancy Tish, who's also on this call. Uh, I don't know if we can open it up to one of them to answer that question, but that's what they're. So they're Nancy. She's been unmuted. So Nancy, can you answer that, please?
Yes, so we're still, Sarah, we're still in the process of reviewing vendor proposals for these kind of services. As you could imagine, because the disease is a rare disease, there isn't a cadre of phlebotomists or nurses who are specifically trained in Fragile X necessarily who can travel to all the homes. But we are trying to find at least those type of people who have had experience with pediatric and adolescent patient populations in clinical trials, and an added plus would be if they've worked with intellectually disabled kids or children who may have, anxiety about having the blood draws. So we're trying to sort all that out. And I think, as Joe said, we can't promise that every single person because we're not really sure where these remote places might be, that there might be a patient until they screen in the study and we know if they're on a concomitant AED or antipsychotic. That would necessitate the visit 6 blood collection. So a little bit is going to be ad hoc as we go, trying to fit the right person with that particular location in the country.
So thank you, Nancy. And I think in our last study, we had what percentage of kids were actually receiving drugs or AEDs? I think it was about 10%. Right?
Yeah,
so,
it was probably 10 to 15%.
Yeah, so that which means that 85% of the kids are not going to have that visit.
Yeah.
But the ask is, let's find those folks who know how to do this and who are sensitive. And listen, look, since we're still looking, I was told we may have 90 families on this line. If you know of a provider who does that, let us know. We want to meet them. Okay, let us know. We want to meet them. Okay.
Yeah, that was another question I had. Just if we do have, because I think you mentioned you could go to maybe an outpatient. If we've had a lot of success with our local children's hospital, would you guys be able to write that order and we could take it there or facilitate that somehow?
Look, on a case-by-case basis, we will listen to everything. Okay, I can't give an overall yes because but on a case-by-case basis, that's what we did in the last study. And I cannot remember a time where I said no.
And I think the other thing is sometimes if families are local to the innovative site, they may request to just come on site and have that extra blood draw. And we're fine with that as well. This is something from a safety perspective that we're going to do for those kiddos who are receiving either antipsychotics or AEDs. So we're trying to make it as with the least extra burden as possible. And so, like I said, some families prefer to bring the child in if they're local to the site and just have the person who normally would draw blood be the one interacting with the child. So I think we would, like Joe said, we'd entertain all requests and try to make it the easiest for the family.
Yeah, we are not going to be difficult or unreasonable. Right? That is not who we are.
Awesome. You mentioned all of the sites, and I know we can kind of look at that specific list to see. But I don't know, did you mention anything in Canada or the Toronto region?
We're still considering it. And the issue at the moment is Canadian regulations, right? We know that there are folks who'd like to be there and help us and who'd like to participate. We're just having a little bit of a challenge with Canadian regulations, which we're actually not having trouble with in Europe, right? So we're going to keep pushing, okay? We're going to keep pushing. On the other hand, there are likely to be some sites that are on sort of the border between Canada and the US across the northern tier and New England. So those may be, as the borders open up for COVID, they may be possibilities. Look, I can't, I know what I would do as a doctor. I'm not a regulatory expert. I may be getting myself in trouble for over-speaking border regulations, because I'm looking at Stephen and he's biting his lip. So I may be over-speaking.
I think you're okay, Joe. I think you're okay. I mean,
right.
we don't have sites in Canada right now, but we do have some, as Joe had said, close to the border. And we've worked out a process internally where we believe we can enroll patients from Canada there might be one extra on-site visit to pick up drug where it would only need to be a parent coming to that visit. So it wouldn't be a visit for the child. It would be a visit just to replenish supply of drug.
Yeah, but for those folks who are Canadian, we want to be there. Okay, we've done our diligence. We want to be there, and we just can't at the moment, and it ain't our fault. Okay, and it's not your fault. It's just the regulatory issues of getting across the border compliantly.
I think one last question that I have,
Sure.
are families compensated for participating?
Nancy, are patients compensated for participating? I don't, we're not paying people's salaries. That I
Yeah,
know
so
about.
so Sarah, there's not reimbursement per se for participation. We are reimbursing for travel and, to get for a parent and child to come to the visits and any reasonable costs associated with that. So we have a travel provider that will work with all the families. So there should be there wouldn't be any out of pocket for airfare or hotel or anything like that. So I think that should help in a lot of cases where there might be concern about the cost of travel if you're not local to a clinical site.
Yeah, I know that was really helpful because we have folks who would come in from hundreds of miles away,
Yeah,
either come in by airplane or car or even train, and then they need to stay overnight. And we were very happy to cover that. And Nancy, we cover that for the entire family, correct?
It's usually a caregiver and
Yeah,
child, depending
right,
on the visit. Yeah.
right. But it's not
Um,
just the one child, right? It's the parents and
and well, depending on who's going to enroll in the trial,
yes.
Joe. So
Okay.
yes, and in many cases we did have siblings, sometimes two or three, and in one case even four siblings who were participating in our Connect FX study. So yes, that's covered then for whoever is traveling in for the purpose of the trial.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're on this. I'm feeling much more intelligent.
That's all the questions I have. I don't know if
Okay.
any others have come in, but thank you very much.
Well, you're so welcome.
I have just one other follow-up question. You
Okay.
had mentioned that the gel was applied to the shoulders and that
Yes.
sometimes for our females with Fragile X that may be a little uncomfortable. Can you apply the gel in other places or does it have to be restricted to the shoulders?
So our preference is the shoulders, and the reason is because the blood flow under the shoulder, the muscle there,
Yep.
allows pretty good uptake.
Okay.
We'll handle this case by case, but if there's a little bit of redness, if there's any other issue, we certainly allow it to the upper thighs.
Okay.
That's what we've done in the past. But we don't want backs, for instance,
Right.
right? Because blood flow isn't as good along the back. So we're looking for a place where the muscle is under the skin because we're actually getting the drug through the skin into the muscle and the blood in the muscle.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering that.
You're very welcome.
I have a follow-up to that question.
Yes,
Of
ma'am.
course.
I'm just wondering, is there any reason why the gel has to be cold?
No, not at all. It was just for some people, it's just convenient.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Like
Good.
if
Okay.
you were in my family, you would find the best place to hide things from the children is in the refrigerator. When my kids were young,
Okay.
they couldn't quite reach. I think that's family by family. There is no reason it needs to be kept cold. No.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
In
And
transit, right? In transit, we try to keep it cold.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say,
Right,
Joe.
in
We
transit,
ship
yes.
it refrigerated, but once it gets to the home, it can be stored ambient at room temperature. As long as it's in a safe place away from where anyone who might be interested in it who's not in the study can
Right.
have access to it.
So yeah, I mean, which is a good point. So you need to have a place where it's ambient temperature, which means sort of room temperature a little bit more. We don't really want it to freeze because we don't really know how it will behave if it freezes, and don't store it in the glove compartment, right? And don't keep it in the car, particularly in the southern states. Those cars can get really super hot, and we don't know what that would do to our gel.
Sure.
I mean, we know what happens to ketchup packets if you leave them in the car too long, right? So we don't want that to happen to the gel.
We kept ours. My son also participated in the trial, Mary Beth, and we kept ours, everything just in the bathroom because that's where we applied it. That's where he knew it would be. So it was always room temperature.
Yeah.
And he was fine for it. In fact, he'll still ask us, is it time to do arms? He'll go, arms? I have to say, nobody, study's over. Like, no.
So, Jen, are you okay with the changes we've made in the study as well as Sarah?
Yes. Sarah and I are actually neighbors. We live about half a mile from each other.
Oh,
Which
wow.
I didn't tell you earlier.
No, it's okay.
We went to Chicago to Rush to participate in the study. And so we did them all. We took a train, we flew once, we drove. And when I say we, I mean me and my son. And so that over time became very difficult, for someone who doesn't like changes to his routine. And then especially if you're driving, it's a 5-hour drive.
Yeah.
So we would have to stay overnight and what have you. And so that virtual option is amazing. That's awesome.
It makes
much more convenient.
It makes my heart leap. Thank you. I'm so glad we're doing it then.
Sarah,
I think COVID kind of made us all, and COVID kind of made everyone look at things and pivot a bit in terms of what had to be done on site. And this was really a learning for us that we could do a lot virtually and ease the burden for families, patients, and the site staff, honestly, too. So, this was really part of coming out of the learnings from our Connect FX study that it sounds like you participated in. So,
yeah, I mean, it sounds like you guys have done everything to make it very convenient for families to participate, between compensating them for travel if they do have to travel, providing them the technology they might need, and doing things virtually. That's pretty impressive. We did have a question come in. I know you mentioned that there are likely trial sites in the UK. And Nancy, you mentioned there are 4 in the chat.
There are
Do you know
minimum of
where
4.
are those?
Yeah. So one is in London at King's College. One is in Scotland at University of Edinburgh. Yeah. One is in Manchester, and one is in, I'm sure butcher the name. It's Leicester. Leicester.
I was going to say, where are Massachusetts people at? They'll pronounce it just fine.
Right. And we are hoping for additional sites. We're still talking to other folks. We're talking to folks in Ireland. We're thinking about potentially other sites. We would love to go more places. The issue is our scales have only been validated in English language.
Right.
And so we need to be working with folks who speak English as a primary language, or one in which they are very comfortable. And it ain't our fault, right? This is just, when you're working with scales and you're working with the government and you're trying to use scales in this way in a regulated fashion. Yeah. And that question is, how do we register for the trial in the UK? I'm glad I can read. Nancy, can I hand that over to you? I'm so glad you attended this.
Yeah.
These investigators in the UK are just top notch, and I've met most of them.
They are. I think it's going to be a really good group of sites there. And Stephen's working actually with the Fragile X Association in the UK as well. But how you'll register is, so those sites are not what we call activated yet. So our clinical trial application with the government there, with the regulatory authorities, has been approved. We now have to go to what in the States is called an IRB, but in the UK it's called Ethics Committee. And so we're scheduled for that review at the end of the month. And then once that's approved, those sites will be ready to go. And once we get a few other documentations in place for the sites, those sites will be ready to start to enroll patients. We're guessing, Kristen, I think we said probably December-ish, or maybe very early January.
Yeah, that's correct. I would say mid-December, but of course that falls during the holiday time. So
yeah. So we have a recruitment vendor that's working with us, Image Bloom, who, if we have any inquiries of parents who are interested in seeing if their child may qualify for the study, that's the, I think, Jennifer, I saw that you put it up earlier on, the Fragile X Help website and the 833 maybe number that was there.
I put it, it's currently in the chat, but I can
Okay,
bring the
great.
slide back up as well.
Okay. And so that's a way to start to talk to a group who will almost like pre-screen and discuss with you discuss with the parents some of the eligibility criteria, and then forward that onto the site to contact you. So I think that will probably be the easiest way, but these sites will also be listed on clinicaltrials.gov on the website. So you'll be able to see the exact sites and the investigator name on clinicaltrials.gov.
Yeah, Nancy, I would just add that as you said, if they go on fragilexhelp.com, they will be able to apply for the study. That's anywhere. And so that information gets sent in and they get referred out to a local site. So that's an easy thing to do. And then specifically for the UK as well, as Nancy mentioned, we're working with the UK Fragile X Society as well. They have a process that they use to communicate directly to families engaged in their network too. So I'm sure your communications from FRAXA goes worldwide, as do many of the communications in the community. So hopefully between all of the different things out there, the families can learn and apply and get referred to a local site.
So
Yeah,
this is really, I
perfect.
want to say something that's really important. It's not that we don't want to hear from you. Okay. That's not the issue at all. It's simply that we need to kind of be hands off, because we're not supposed to know, as a sponsor of the study, anybody's name, who's in, or any of those things. Now, if you run into trouble, we won't freak out if you reach out to us, right? If you can't get through to the doctor, you can't get through to fragilexhelp.com or anything, then let us know, because then something's broken. But in general, because we're in a regulated industry, we're not supposed to know as a sponsor who's actually in this study. It's not that we don't want to hear from you, it's that we kind of can't. But if you run into trouble, if something's broken, don't get frustrated. Come yell at us, okay? Please.
So Jennifer, you asked if they could contact FRAXA. You have the information on your site. We can work with you. Again, you can refer them to fragilexhelp.com through your communication. That would be fine, yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that they knew they could reach out with questions or if they needed something, and we'd be happy to help too.
Absolutely.
Yes, please. It's much better for folks, frankly, to keep us in some ways just at arm's distance, right? Just for the purity of the study. So, we're liberal in every other way, but there are certain things that we kind of have to be at arm's length. Otherwise, people will think we're biasing the results, and we don't want to be there.
That makes sense. I'll do one last call out for questions. They've kind of slowed down in the chat, but if you have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat and our panelists can answer it. Or you're welcome to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask it live. Doesn't look like anyone's typing.
Okay.
Hi, I actually do have a question.
Excellent. Go ahead.
My name is Frances. I am actually the manager of IB Recruit, which is doing the recruitment efforts. So I work with Image Bloom, and
Cool.
my team has been working on the study for a couple months now. We've gotten a lot of interest in the study, and just some of the questions that have come up that I do know has been a challenge, especially in Australia. Just because of the COVID restrictions and travel restrictions. If they do fly anywhere, they do have to quarantine for 10 days coming back. So is there any way of those type of visits solely being virtual and the medication being shipped, or do they actually have to attend those 4 on-site visits?
Who wants to take that?
Nancy, you're speaking, so why don't you take it?
Okay, Frances, for those 4 visits, we really ideally need them done on site. And I do know that Australia is lifting their travel restrictions. I think they've even started that. We've heard from our colleagues in Australia. So hopefully things will start to improve. I mean, again, like Joe said, I think if there's a situation that comes up that's an impossibility to travel, that we want to hear about that. But in general, we would like those 4 visits of the 8 to be on site.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all your help too.
Definitely.
It looks like someone typed in the chat, how soon will results be shared after the study is concluded?
Oh, good question.
So I don't know if you have, based on the initial study, about how long that whole process takes.
As quickly as we can. We are dedicated to transparency. We were pretty quick after the last patient out in the first Connect study. That took about 2 years to recruit. And Stephen, do you remember how quickly we were out with top line results? It wasn't much longer after that last patient out.
That's right, Joe. It was less than 2 months. And keep in mind that we have to look at all the data and understand it, and so we can actually communicate it appropriately and make it make sense for those who are getting those communications. So generally, I would think about that timeline.
Yeah, and the reason why it takes that whole 2 months is we have to go to the sites and we have to go and cross every T and dot every I and make sure that any blank space is filled in. And if someone reverses height and weight, we got to go and resolve that. So we absolutely have obsessionality about those things. It's called cleaning the database. And we typically have quite a few people who are assigned to that task to make sure that everything is, we call it clean, but it really means accurate and precise. And then we have to talk to the statisticians and then they do their thing.
When is the trial due to start? Does everybody start at the same time, or
No.
do sites start differently?
Sites start as soon as they're ready.
Okay.
So
And
some
when
of the
do you
sites are up and running.
anticipate that?
Some are already up and running.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Some are already up and running, and others, it depends on how quickly they can get their universities, et cetera, up behind them. And
Okay.
it always helps when the community nudges them a little bit.
Okay.
Right? It always helps when the community says, "We know you're busy, but could you go just a little faster?"
Got it. Good question, Tim.
Because I know when I was an investigator, someone was pushing my department, I moved more quickly than I might have otherwise moved. We're all human.
I don't see any other questions coming in. So I would like to, first and foremost, thank the entire Zynerba staff, it sounds like.
You got about half the company here. We're a tiny little company. You got a whole bunch of us.
Tiny little company. We got all of you. Thank you, Stephen and
really
Dr.
invested
Palumbo. Nancy and Kristen, you've been exceptionally helpful as well. So thank you for joining us. And thank you, Sarah, for being our guest facilitator. You did a wonderful job as always. If anyone has questions, of course, you have those websites. You're welcome to contact us at FRAXA, and we will make sure that we reiterate where to find more information as well, or perhaps try to get answers for you too. So thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of your evening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.